All right, welcome to the Gateway API meeting. Today is May 22nd, at least in California. Happy Monday, everyone. And yeah, just we've got a pretty packed agenda today, but don't hesitate to add things. We might have a little bit of time here. So this agenda, I dropped it in chat. Don't hesitate to add things throughout. Especially triage. If you have things that PRs, issues, whatever, that could use some attention, please add them to this list. We just want to make sure that we're not losing track of things. And there's been a lot of movement over the past week. So we probably have missed at least one thing. So yeah, that's all. As a quick reminder, this meeting is covered by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct. In general, that just means to be nice to each other. Please remember that we're all here just to try and make this a better project, and we want to help each other out. Everyone is coming from different backgrounds, so be friendly. That's all. With that, I'll get started right away on the first item on the agenda, which is Shane's, looking at different meeting time that we could try and alternate with. Maybe Shane, you want to?
Yeah, Simba, it is time. We've had really good numbers on the meetings that we've done the alternative times for. I did just finish sending out the update for next week's. So, I mean, this was just to make sure we do more of them. I would like to think at this point we could probably commit to doing a regular alternative time. I feel like we could at least try it. We don't necessarily have to do it as a bi-weekly kind of thing. I think it might be okay to just for a couple of months try like a one a month, and then if it's still really good turnout, we could up it to 2, see how that goes. That's kind of my thinking.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable direction. It is unfortunate because when Nick is no longer in Europe, that time will be really hard for him, and always good feedback from him. So yeah, maybe we can start with like what you said, try this for once a month. And the reason that we're moving it next week is it was basically between not having a meeting, because if you're based in the US, you probably have a long weekend and are not working on Monday. And I think there was also a holiday in Germany as well on Monday. So anyway, moving it off to Tuesday, at least for next week, and then maybe we can aim for once a month or so. Keith asked a really good question on this doc that I wanted to highlight. At least the goal of using Tuesdays was we were trying to alternate with the time that Gamma has, so that Gamma can have a meeting at approximately this time slot, and then in roughly the same time slot, Gateway would have one. So definitely trying not to conflict. But it does mean, as we experienced last week, it does mean that whenever we have these morning for me meetings, these earlier time slots, it means that we do have the potential of having both a Gateway API meeting and a Gamma meeting in the same day, which maybe isn't great either. So we may want to fine tune that a bit still. Open to ideas. Yeah. And I don't know if anyone else on the Gamma side wants to chime in here, but I think from Gamma side, you've also been getting a bit more attendance at your earlier time slot. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's been at least the same, if not 1 or 2 more folks.
Yeah. That's good to hear. Yeah, and I think last week we topped out around 23, I want to say, in our earlier time slot. So around the same, maybe a little bit higher as well. So yeah. Okay, I'll keep on moving then. The next one is an issue that I raised a little bit ago, and maybe it'd be useful to have a bit of a poll. I've asked around in Slack too, and I'm realizing that my question is not as clear as I would like it to be. So maybe I'll drop it back to here for a second and what I'm really trying to ask is, should a request to slash foo, well, yeah, like this, match a, well, okay, should an exact match on slash foo match a request, a slash foo request? I think that the answers I'm getting suggest no. But it is not clear from the spec what that is. So maybe we can just open up for a little bit of conversation here. Of implementations today, I'm hearing some that are saying, no, this would not match. Shane, go ahead.
I completely forget. Did we end up finding an RFC that had guidance on this?
And not that I know of.
Or
I looked in the HTTP RFC and couldn't find much, but maybe I just overlooked it. Maybe John had an answer.
I don't have an answer to that. But I did have an answer to the general question, which was somewhat snarky, but I mean, does the left and right exactly match? No, it should not be an exact match then. I would be pretty cautious if we have exact match means something other than an exact match. I mean, we should check the RFCs and whatnot, but if not, it seems a bit sketchy to do that.
I agree with.
Or at the very least, like,
yeah.
Sorry, one more thing. At the very least, that with the trailing slash should not match one without a trailing slash. Maybe we could say if there is no trailing slash in the match, then we match one with the trailing slash. Although that's still a little suspicious, but that seems a little better to me. We could be, yeah, anyhow.
I feel persuaded by John's suggestion. I mean, if the RFC doesn't specifically say something to the alternate, I can still see this being a problem potentially down the road. Somebody's like, well, I put in foo and it wasn't, no, but it does seem to make sense to me. Like exact match means exact match, you know? Very
Right. I mean,
straightforward.
this would definitely not be an exact match. Longest prefix match, well, even there, this is a bit sketchy.
Yeah, for prefix match, the spec is actually very clear, and we have said that a trailing slash is ignored.
Right.
For exact match, our spec is just, matches the URL path exactly, which I guess if you take that very literally, then yeah, the trailing slash is meaningful. And that seems to be what the overwhelming feedback here. For a little bit more context, I have a related issue, which is it seems entirely reasonable that some people are going to want to be able to match requests with a trailing slash and redirect to requests that don't have a trailing slash. And if we said that the trailing slash was not meaningful on an exact match request, we'd have no way of doing that as the API is structured today. So I think the feedback I'm getting in both cases is no. So I will work on a PR to clarify that. Actually, there's one more hand. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, also, Ingress V1, the conformance tests said that trailing slashes were significant, if that matters at all.
Yep. For exact or prefix or both?
For exact. And
okay.
For prefix might have been slightly different, but there was something in the tests there about slashes.
Okay. Good to know. Okay, that sounds good. It sounds like I can, or anyone can work on a PR to clarify the spec there. Great.
So,
okay.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah.
Not to open up a whole new can of worms, but I'm going to do it. Why are trailing slashes ignored on prefix matches?
Yeah, that's I'd have to go back to that conversation. That was a very good reason at the time.
Let's ask ChatGPT. I'm sure it can give us an answer.
It will say something that might be convincing, but whether or not it's true.
Yeah, that was my
I
point.
seem to remember it being something to do with we were thinking a bit about I think we might have been thinking about inclusion and delegation at the time, because it really matters for inclusion and delegation. Because if you are including a route that with a prefix of ABC and you have another route that has if you're including a route with a prefix of /ABC/ and you're including another route that has /DEF, then the path would be /ABC//DEF. But I think the intent here is to make it so that prefix means is intended to mean path fragment, not like like a piece of a path, not like literally a prefix, because it's kind of more intended to be used for /ABC/ something, not /ABCDEF. Yeah, not a string prefix. Exactly. Thanks, Benjamin.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is, or so go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, reading the comment here, it makes it like it sounds to me that /ABC/ would match /ABCD. Oh wait, sorry, never mind. I'm sorry. When a path element
that's the
refers to a
opposite.
list of labels. Okay, yeah.
Yep.
All right,
Yeah,
cool.
so-
I'm no more questions.
No, it makes sense. And I want to clarify that we have left room in the API to have a path prefix match that behaves differently than the path prefix match that exists today. But the path prefix match that exists today is what Nick described. It is matching a segment of a path. And that's it. So the trailing slash is not particularly meaningful when you're just saying, I want to match the segment that starts with, or segments that start with this. Yeah, anyway, but we have left room. You could have a different prefix match type. This is path prefix, but you could have a different prefix match type that was really just, /ABC, and any, ABCD would be a valid match in that case. Yeah.
I would imagine we would call it string prefix in that case.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. I think, did someone else have a hand? All right, I
I
will.
want to
keep
mention
on.
something.
Yeah.
So in all of these cases, right, from a usability perspective, when you work with people trying to leverage these technologies, they tend to come from something in the past that they've worked with. PCRE, for example, is a great example of something that people are very familiar with. And when they attempt to use this, if we standardize with something in the past that's reasonable for us, we should just advertise that as our path forward. We are compatible with the way matches happen as it does with this standard piece of equipment. So that that sort of smoothens the learning curve a bit and leads to fewer mistakes. It's just been my experience in the past.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and a very good tip for any of our documentation to try to reference things that our concepts are coming from, where the way that we're doing this kind of matching is entirely compatible with X technology. I would be very encouraging and appreciative of any contributions to docs anywhere like that, because I think that'd be very helpful. Yeah, good call. There's a question from Lewin. Yeah, so I think we have validation here that specifically prohibits 2 dots in a path, so that the second path match here of ABC/A ... would just not be valid, or should not make it through validation.
Yeah, we prevent all the usual path traversal shenanigans.
Yep. Cool. All right. I feel like it's probably too late in the day for Dan. Yeah, I don't see Dan here, but
Oh yeah,
Just
he
an
said
F-
that he wouldn't make it.
Yeah, just an FYI, this looks awesome. I can't believe I haven't started yet. Yeah, anyway, this is a thing. So Gateway API controller is coming along on various fronts, but it's cool to see another community implementation, and Dan does all kinds of cool things. So I'm excited to see where this one lands. And he was working on what's the other one linked in Slack that I'm missing out on right now? Yeah, KubeVip Gateway API, which does anyone remember? Is this the same thing? Like I know Dan was working on both of these. Are these the
Yeah,
same thing? Or are they?
I think the other one is like a more generic implementation that could be
Okay.
consumed by other things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And hopefully we'll have more time for him to talk about this in our next meeting, because it should be more friendly to his time zone. Yeah. Any comments, questions on that? Okay, I'll hand it back to Shane, conformance profiles.
Yep, just the prototype merged, or rather a usable prototype is now merged. It's under an experimental go build tag. So don't get caught up on that, but it's an alternative test suite that you could try out. I believe at this point we've had 2 implementations try it out. So just wanted to kind of raise that to people that it's there for checking it out, making some updates. Take a look at the GEP, which is 1709. And the next step is kind of we're heading towards marking it implementable. If we get through a few cycles of kind of testing the prototype out, nobody has any real comments. So just to call out, get involved in that if that's interesting to you, try it out. Let us know what you think.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I'm so excited to see this move forward. I think since many implementations are represented here, I want to highlight one of the takeaways and goals of this conformance profile work, and that is that we want to highlight the results on our implementations page. So we want to really make it clear to anyone who's trying to understand, this is an API, what implementation should I use? We'd like to highlight the implementations that are available and the ones that have submitted, their reports of this being run with the latest version of Gateway API and the latest version of their implementation, for example. So that's something that will come at some point. Right now, the implementations page is pretty wide open, and I think it will become more structured, and there will be definitely some incentive to run these. So please, the earlier the better in terms of running this through, trying to understand if it works with your implementation. If it doesn't, what we can do to help it, be a better fit. But this is definitely something that we're trying to fit in between now and GA. Yeah, I don't know.
Yep, and we only have the Go test suite right now. Nobody picked up the CLI one, so I think Mattia finally decided to go ahead and get that started so that we can help people that way. If you need the CLI version, just please reach out to Mattia. I'm sure he would be happy to he'd be happy to know that you need it, and then he might we could break it down into things that we could work on together. So that's kind of the state of things. It's going good. Just hoping for more people to jump in so that we don't have to come back and change things, but rather we can change them on the way in. So, and the next thing I got is a bit of interesting discussion. So I think a number of you I've kind of reached out to. I've noticed with my kind of Gateway API maintainer hat on that lots of people are interested in multi-cluster, but not a whole lot of people have gas in the tank for it. So I was wondering if there was things we could do to help facilitate basically giving people more to work with to get started as a way to kind of make it easier to land and start working on multi-cluster implementations. So I just floated I worked with someone from Quadrant named Dan or Dave, And we both kind of brought the conversation to the last multi-cluster sync that, maybe there's room to kind of build more machinery in multi-cluster. And that machinery being kind of like generic machinery on top of, say, multi-cluster services that would be in service of potentially everyone. And doing that upstream might give people kind of I'm not going all in on this yet, but I do want to kind of make moves towards this kind of scenario where we could all kind of get solutions here and start seeing things working for those of us who don't have implementations. So that's kind of what we floated. The general response from multi-cluster SIG about like doing more machinery in upstream was a little guarded, but I think the main takeaway was it seems like they felt if more people were willing to show up to help with that machinery, they would be open to it. So that's kind of just general call out that I wanted to point out. There's the meeting was last week, so if you want to go check it out on YouTube and get a little bit more context, if you're interested in multi-cluster, you might find that one interesting. And then in general, if you want to start showing up to the multi-cluster syncs and continue the conversation about whether or not there might be some room to do more upstream open source machinery instead of everybody doing their own implementation, I think we could all end up, building something that would kind of be cool. And I could see Gateway API kind of being at the center of that right now. I could see Gateway API potentially being big in the mix of it. Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, so this is extremely exciting to me for a couple of reasons. The main one being, this is kind of just my personal opinion, but I get the sense that there is, I don't know that MCS API is as complete as we might want it to be, especially coming from a mesh perspective. It makes some assumptions that aren't always great, but that being said, it's growing, it's being used by a lot of people, and it's solving a lot of the common use cases for multi-cluster Kubernetes. So, it's not a opportunity to change some of it, but I do think part of the reason why it hasn't evolved in the way that I've been personally looking for is because there is the startup cost to anything multi-cluster. You have to create a controller, and there are lots of non-trivial problems in creating a controller, and everyone in each implementation does things slightly differently. I think that there's a lot of conversation that can be driven from like a reference implementation for people who just want to play around with it or start to evaluate it as an API. I think it'll reveal some, chinks in the armor, for lack of a better term. So I love to see it happen. I'm worried that the thing needed for something like this machinery for multi-cluster to happen is facing the same problem that the MCS API in general has had, which is just bodies and people who have the bandwidth to be able to invest. And that's where I currently am. I would love to do this kind of stuff, but just don't have the bandwidth at the moment.
Yeah. I've checked in with a lot of you because I was curious to see who was interested, and I was trying to see if there might be room in upstream to like help everyone. And that is the common thread. That's what I've heard from almost everyone. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think bandwidth discussions aside, I think one of the biggest things that SIG multi-cluster needs in terms of like the intersections with Gateway API is for implementers to start playing with it. And I know there's a few folks that have like had some critiques of it where like some things feel more aligned to a service discovery use case, which is what it was designed for, to be fair. And it doesn't always fit quite as you might expect with mesh. Sorry about the dog. Yeah, so it seems like the core resources are pretty solid, and it's more of just like the implementation details and getting more folks involved and whatever we can do to help facilitate implementations. I know that there's work that started up conformance tests. I think that's really encouraging and can go a long way towards being part of that machinery. But yeah, it was like
Yes, tests can definitely
Yeah.
be a big part of that.
Yeah,
Your dog,
getting more
I
folks
feel
in
like,
here in.
yeah, I feel like your
think will be
dog's
good.
always mad, Mike.
She just doesn't like me talking.
No, it's a great point, and I think I agree with you entirely that if we just did more stuff in this space together, we would probably come up with some better understanding, if nothing else, right? So I'm really down for that, and I think, I mean, for those of you who think that the bike shed needs to be purple, I don't really have any specific ideas at the moment, except maybe vaguely we talked about potentially just like starting with the first obvious stepping stone, which is like solving efficient service import. Like that might be a place for a non-test related machinery. But again, it's all open questions. I'd like you to, if you're interested in those questions and interested in maybe, I can't go all in on an MCS implementation today, but I might be able to go in if like, 5 or 6 of us are going in and we can do it together. Feel free to PM me, and also just go to the next meeting. We can put something on the agenda and kind of continue the conversation a little bit. They seemed very open to that last week.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's tricky about MCS in particular is just that an implementation is basically best done in a way that is not using a single cluster as the source of truth, which makes it a little bit difficult. So it's definitely easier for the existing cloud vendor implementations because they can do that in a pretty straightforward way. So that's definitely a consideration that other folks will have to figure out in whichever way seems appropriate for their use case.
I just wanted to add something that's on slightly tangent, but conversation about Sigma cluster made me think about it. The other big piece of feedback that I've gotten from internal teams looking to implement NCS, aside from live machinery, has been the KEP process and the iteration cycles. I've had people saying that we love to work more upstream, but we can't spend 3 years getting the spec promoted through the KEP process to like stable before we've got to have our product in within the year and things like that. So I think if we could, I'm very interested in working with Sigma cluster. This is something I actually got bandwidth for. It's like seeing if they're open to something like a GET process. I don't even know what that acronym would be or how to pronounce it. But if there was kind of a more quickly iterating process for folks, I know I've got people at Microsoft who would be more open to contributing upstream and sharing projects with community in that way.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I feel like there are definitely people that want to do that. So maybe it's just starting the conversation. Our meeting time next week, 8:30 Pacific, will be immediately followed. I think it will be immediately followed by the multi-cluster meeting. So maybe there's some room there for a little bit of overlap. Maybe we can invite some multi-cluster people to our call, vice versa. There's a ton of overlap in the things we're doing, and I know it's been hard to. I think my understanding from the multi-cluster people I've talked with, they've had trouble getting many people to really contribute and buy in. But I think, I mean, I'm really biased here, but I think that Gateway brings a lot of value on top of multi-cluster. And so when we can combine these two, it becomes that much more interesting and compelling to work together and just build value on top. So maybe we can use some of the momentum we have here to help with MCS. Yeah. Shane?
Can you hear me this time? Okay.
Yeah.
I had to rejoin. I can see my things working now. I had to rejoin because something happened with my sound. But yeah, I think, Keith, if it wasn't already said while I was rejoining, I would just go and put that right on their agenda for the next meeting and just bring it up. I think that they'd be, I mean, obviously they're the ones that need to hear that, right? Yeah. John asks in chat, what are the gaps today, API changes or machinery? I think that is a good question. And actually, Rob, I feel like you might be able to answer that a little better than me.
It depends on your perspective. Obviously, from the like GK networking perspective, we have an implementation and it mostly kind of works. So I could say, oh yeah, well, it works. But I also recognize that there are issues and some things that could be smoothed out. And I also understand that the machinery to support this is complicated. And as we've gotten towards multi-cluster gateway, and as we've started to talk about the intersection of this API with Gamma, we're realizing that there are some complexities that feel like they don't necessarily need to be solved. Like, one low-hanging fruit that's already been brought up in SIG multi-cluster is that currently the spec, or maybe previously the spec, required that you publish endpoint slices in every cluster and kind of propagate them across. And for somebody that's just trying to implement this via mesh or in-cluster implementation, you probably already have this information, but you don't want to go through the effort of, keeping all the endpoint, building your own endpoint slice controller. That's, I think, a good example of things that we can remove or simplify. And I know that specific one is already in progress, but I imagine there are others that we're going to run into, and the best way to run into them is by trying or just even looking at the spec and trying to gauge how would I implement this and how painful would it be, and trying to remove those. So John, you may have had some things in mind, and I think Mike, you also commented, but yeah, that's my perspective.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Makes sense.
From Cilium's point of view, yeah, we don't, because we already have a cluster mesh thing, and it does not use endpoint slices or service import at the moment. Yeah, the more that we can not have to worry about the endpoint slices, the better off we will be. The easier it will be for us to support multi-cluster API.
I saw a talk on cluster mesh, and it looked like it would actually be a good fit. Some implementation details aside, it could adopt them.
Yeah, look, I mean, cluster mesh effectively already imports services from the other clusters. It just doesn't. It imports them as services, not as service imports. So it should be a reasonably straightforward change to make, that that you also see a service import, like, or you don't see it. I'm not sure exactly again, implementation, blah blah blah. But like the mechanisms to do all of that stuff are already there in Cilium, and so like just making it so that the spec and Cilium line up shouldn't be that hard. If the endpoints don't need to be included, that would be a big deal.
Great.
Cool. Well, I probably took up a little bit too much time with this one, but I think everybody's thoughts on this were great. And please do join next week at 12:30 Eastern. I want to say that's 9:30 Pacific for the SIG.
Yeah, it's immediately after our gateway meeting. So whatever time zone that is, yeah, add an hour. Yeah, cool. Great discussion. Thanks for bringing that up, Shane. Next we have method match priorities. Jay, are you here?
Yep.
Awesome.
Looks like this is sort of getting handled just generally in GitHub, but so one of the recent conformance test PRs added a test that added priority for method matching to one of the tests. So the matches in the test had header matching more significant than method matching. That's not actually specified in the spec yet, which this issue was open to specify that. So just wanted to, yeah, I think people have replied on GitHub and whatnot, but looks like this is getting handled, but I just maybe open it up to discussion on if we want to handle this in the 0.7 release, what people think about the relative priority of HTTP method matching versus other attributes of the request. existing PR to change it. Looks like it's adding method matching as the least significant attribute. I don't know if that's what people agree with or not, but yep, I'm just calling it out in case you have opinions and want to add to the discussion.
Yeah,
That's something I
that
probably would have put it. I probably would have put it above header. Would have been where I would put it personally, but yes, I'd be interested to talk more about that. Probably just talk on the.
it is going to make it a mouthful. Well, not a mouthful, but as has been pointed out here, we've got this nice structure of must be given with the largest number of, and then method matches just doesn't fit in that list, even though I agree it probably does make sense somewhere above where it is right now. But it just doesn't match with the rest of these in sentence structure. So it'll require some wordsmithing, I guess. But I don't have a strong opinion on exactly where it lives. It does seem like a few people are suggesting between path match and header match. Seems okay to me.
Yeah, conceptually, right? Does it make sense to segment a subset of requests based on the method more significantly than the header? A header, yes, I guess. I don't know. People do lots of things, so yeah, I don't know if there's any particular. I mean, that seems like a valid use case. I mean, it's quite a significant differentiating feature of a HTTP request. I think I agree with that general sentiment, but yeah.
Okay, that sounds good to me. I don't know if Gaurav not on this call, but it does seem like this is already getting handled in GitHub. So maybe just we can keep on adding comments here. It seems like a pretty tiny change to move this up a bit and do a bit of wordsmithing around it. I added a comment on the issue here, just agreeing with what others have said, that this really should belong in 07. I think it should be an 07.1 milestone. And I'd love to see it get resolved this week because we're aiming to release 07.1 early next week. So I think we're on track for that. Just please, as you're reviewing things, prioritize reviewing this specific PR as it evolves over time. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Thanks again for catching that. Yeah, it would be a shame if we missed this from 07.1. Any last comments on this one? Cool. All right. Next up, I just wanted to come back to policy again. I know we've been discussing this a little bit, and unfortunately, Flynn, I don't think is on this call. I know others who've been involved in the conversation are on this call, so we can discuss a little bit, but I'm just trying to get an idea of where we can go next. I think Flynn and I think Shane helped with this proposal as well, have good thoughts here about the complexity of the model that we have right now. I'm biased in that I think a lot of these can be solved by making the existing model more discoverable. But Nick, I think you have your own thoughts. I know there's been lots of good, useful discussion on this PR. So definitely encourage others to comment here if you have your own thoughts. I think there's been some really good, solid discussion throughout. But yeah, maybe I'll hand it off to Nick before I go too far.
Yeah, Flynn and I had a catch up on this on Friday, and I think I've got I got an update sort of drafting. It's long already. But yeah, so just to broadly summarize, I think we talked a little bit about, I think I saw your reply today, Rob, that I think the exact, him sort of saying it's not declarative is sort of based on a, sort of very specific like on the experience of Jane in his example, and I think we're basically saying the same thing. It's just a slightly different way of saying it. So I've got a bit to clarify that. But yeah, I think the key part here in my mind is clarifying the discoverability and adding some ways to sort of address the discoverability, the discoverability problem. I am sort of writing up a bit of a, it's probably going to end up being a mini gap of its own in that comment. I think just sort of running through like, here's the things I think we could do, and here's why we haven't just done them. And some of that probably will end up getting folded back into the gap as alternatives considered or something like that, I think. But I'll put it in here for now so that we can have the discussion all in one place. I think that to broadly summarize, I think for the discoverability of this, there are three things that a user of a route needs to know. Firstly, they need to know that a policy is affecting their route. If so, which policy are affecting their route? And if so, ideally, what policy is affecting, like what policy settings are being changed on their route? Obviously, knowing what policy settings are being changed on your route will generally tell you the other stuff as well. But being able to keep the what and specify it is actually surprisingly difficult and has scalability problems. So we might have to step back to one of the other ones or have some other way to do it. That's what a lot of the other things are for. So I'm just in the process of kind of explaining that in a way that doesn't sort of have me rambling for 30 seconds and is a bit more comprehensible. But yeah, so I will put another thing on there soon. I definitely encourage other people to have a read of the discussion and see what you think. This is it's sort of starting to get down into let's argue about API machinery territory, and so which always gets a little hairy. So yeah, look, that's one of the reasons why this is complicated, is because we're doing stuff that hasn't been done a lot in Kubernetes before. This sort of having a reasonably complicated system of objects that also has other objects sort of modifying it is very complicated. It's complex, I think is a better way to say it. Ideally, it can be complex without being complicated. I think that's what we're trying to work towards. It will always be complex because it's solving a very complex problem. But ideally, we can make it so that it's not too complicated, so that it's easier to understand the state of the system at any one point in time.
Yeah, thank you for the update. I know I've also spent some time chatting with Flynn about this as well. But it sounds like you've got a really thorough update coming, so I'm looking forward to that. Thank you. I think there are a variety of things here. From my perspective, I wish there were a better way than what we have, but I don't know that there's a better way to accomplish all the goals that we have. That's, again, my own biased perspective on the world. With that said, I do think it's really important, and this kind of comes back to what you were talking about, Nick, of we need to make it easier to understand fundamentally that there is a policy that is affecting your thing. That is key to everything here, and it's I think led to a lot of the frustration that we've seen, including this. The parable from Flynn in the SCEP was very well written, and I think a lot of the frustration in that story was that the author of the route did not understand that policy had been affecting their route. It was not visible to them. So I personally would really like to invest in at least a couple ways to improve that. One of them but I see there's already a couple of hands, so maybe I'll stop what I'm saying and defer. I think Shane, you're up first. I can't hear you if you're talking, Shane.
Oh, sorry. I said,
Okay,
actually,
yeah.
I'm trying to do more listening, so I'd like Hamza and Andy to go first.
Great.
I think Andy was first, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, yeah, I'll go. I haven't read all this stuff, so maybe this is more complicated and I just don't have the context, but as I was listening to you talk about it, it sounded like this is something that should just go on the route status. Like if a policy is being applied to a route, it should be in the status. I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe- but if
that is-
since that's not the answer, since you haven't already come to that answer, I'm assuming there's something that
there are.
makes that wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, there are reasons that it comes down to fan out. It's very possible to have one policy affect many objects. And so if you're updating the status on every route because a policy got updated, it's a really good way to produce a lot of extra load on the API server. And historically, doing that sort of updating one object creates many updates for the API server has been very bad for scalability, very, very bad. And so that's one of the reasons why we don't want to just do that. But that is a very short summary of the stuff that I was in the middle of writing literally just before this meeting. So yeah, Hamza, you're next.
Yeah. I mean, initially I was thinking about what he said, but I think, so Flynn and I have talked about this like a little bit in like previous discussions, and in my mind, like one of the biggest things that I think would actually be, or what's on my mind when I think about policy attachment is the debug story. So like if I'm debugging a route, whether I'm Jane or whatever Flynn calls the infrastructure engineer manager, one of the things I want is like super useful to know is like having like the full state of like how each of the resources are sort of related to each other in terms. So like it's not just with the policy attachments, but it's also like with routes and like gateways and like which gateways are being affected by gateway classes. And I think a lot of that could also just be solved by additional tooling. So for example, like having I think this was brought up in the gap or in one of the discussions about having like some sort of kube control plugin, or actually I would even prefer it to be part of kube control itself. So sort of like you have like a kube control get dash graph option that basically allows you to visualize like all of the situations. So if I do like kube control get HTTP route / dash graph, and it not only lists the route, but it will list all the policy attachments that are affected by that, and you can also sort of like chain it upstream as well to like see like, okay, it's part of this gateway, and then this gateway class is going to just like manage all these gateways and things like that. But that kind of gets around like the sort of status part, because now you're only hitting the API server when you're like calling it through the CLI or some other way, and not every time you update the policy attachments, which presumably would lead to less load on the API server.
Yeah, those are great points. That's definitely been directionally areas that I've been interested in. I think there's more in the discussion, kind of like you referenced. So there is an open discussion on just like, how can we make this better? Please submit your ideas. There's some ideas, plenty of ideas already out there that have some comments on them, but I definitely want to get more movement here. And I think we already have a couple front runners. One of them like the route status, if we can solve fan out, and the other like kubectl plugin, hopefully more integrated, maybe included by default soon. I don't know, but yeah, absolutely. I think we're all agreeing on the fundamental problems, and we all want to make the situation better. I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's just one thing that I wanted to quickly address that, which is another thing that's going to be in my response. But I think one of the other metrics that we need to have is that we need to try and keep the, I call it the troubleshooting distance for a route as close to 1 as possible. The troubleshooting distance is like how far you have to go to figure out what the problem is. You can, in Kubernetes, you can use that. A good proxy for that is the number of kubectl commands you need to do to understand what's going on, right? So 1 is the best, right? Like You get one, you get the object you created, and you understand what's broken. It's not always possible, but the closer you can get it to one, the easier it's going to be. And so, two is not as good as one, but it's better than undefined, because it's not possible for you to figure it out, right? Like, so that's sort of one of the things I think we should be aiming for. Is we may not be able to get it because of scalability concerns or whatever. We may not be able to get it to be one, but we should always be aiming to get that number as low as possible.
Yeah, well said. I do want to time box this, but I know, Vinod, you had a hand up. Maybe we can get to you real quick.
Sure. Yeah, I was going to talk about the operational aspect of testing as well. So if it were intended for operational things, metrics, logs, other debug tasks, as well as attaching compliance-like policies. Let's say you had some industry standard compliance that you wanted to switch on. Maybe there's some way to extend it for that.
Oh, that's really interesting. So basically to have a set of policies and settings that, complied to HIPAA or whatever compliance standard you're targeting. Is that the direction
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, and also your point there about again, kind of on the observability front, we've been focused a lot on the debugging front with the application developer or somebody who's really close to the infrastructure. But what you're describing is kind of the other view of this from the top down. Where are these policies getting applied, and are they really being effective everywhere I need them to be for compliance? And that's something you want to see via metrics or similar, instead of just looking at every route status or whatever it happens to be. So
map reduce for status.
Yeah.
Yes.
These are really great. I encourage everyone. That last one is like an area that I completely had neglected. I don't think anyone's brought anything up about the org admin looking down and trying to understand where their policy was being applied. And I think that's really important. So please, if you've got time, if someone can capture that in this discussion as an idea, suggestion, whatever, it'd be great.
Yeah, please.
But
we are. I will incorporate that into the response as well, because it's still in progress.
Great. But we are quickly running out of time, and we got a really important one here at the end. Candace, you wanted to talk about TLS from gateway to backend. Jesse, are you still on the call? Yeah.
I am. I didn't write this here, so it might have been someone else who wrote it.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
But I did add a comment underneath.
Yeah. So.
Which I think is the same thing that we've just been talking about, basically. So
okay,
I'll
perfect.
Read
you can go ahead.
Oh, so generally, you and I and Shane had a discussion about the gap that Nick had updated a while back regarding using policy attachment to work out the details for backend TLS as in the minimize limited form in my previous GAP, which is very scaled down TLS backend TLS discussion. And there are a couple of drawbacks, but does this freeze it in place now? The idea that it's I wanted to see if there's any implementers who are using policy attachment and experiencing issues with this. I called it reverse lookup, but you're calling it discoverability, basically. So you're pointing to a bunch of services, say, you need to route to these services, but how do you make the connection between your route and service if you have a freestanding object that has no connection to the route but to the service only?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that one's going to end up looking a lot like reference grant. I think where you have to be watching all the reference grants and figuring out when you get a service, you're going to need to get you're going to need to say, oh, am I doing routing to this? I'll just do a check to see if I've got a TLS backend policy that covers it. So you'll need to keep you'll need to watch them all and just see if the service that you've got is relevant. Like you have to watch both service and TLS backend policy and watch them against each other as part of the reconciliation process inside the controller. That doesn't solve the problem for, I own a service and I want to see if my TLS backend policy is actually in use by a gateway implementation. That is the discoverability problem.
Okay.
yeah.
So people who are implementing this now don't have any issues with that?
Oh no, I think the issues are present. I'll say like GK gateway implementation, we have multiple policies that we have implemented, supported, whatever. It works approximately, but it sure would be nice to clean up the UX around it. So that's why I've been trying to push for and I'm not the only one, but trying to push to improve what I'm calling discoverability, but really just understanding that policy has affected you and how it has. And to fill in the other gap here, I'm the one who added this, and I actually intended it to be part of the discussion around policy, but it's a very natural next step. I think that where we may end up with this TLS from gateway to backend is a built-in policy, maybe. What we know for sure is that we need to extend service. We need to say, here's how you validate TLS connections from gateway to this backend, which is probably a service or service import. And we don't have a great way to do that right now that isn't policy attachment. We could try and fit it into backend ref, but that means every single route, every kind of reference to that, you need to configure it separately. That's kind of not great. So it feels like kind of as a natural follow-up to policy, this discussion around TLS from gateway to backend may kind of just force our hand of really making us ensure that whatever we have here works well. So that's kind of why I added this where I did.
Sorry, I was the one who re-indented it to make it sort of a separate thing because I was like,
no, it's great. Yep. But unfortunately, I think there's a lot more discussion to be had here, but I do want to note that we're already a minute over. So thank you so much to everyone for discussing. I'm looking forward to getting some progress through on this. Just a heads up that right now, the trajectory seems to be towards policy attachment, but we'll see. And definitely feedback and other ideas are very welcome here. With that, have a great week, and reminder that we're meeting at an earlier time on Tuesday of next week, and we'll see as many of you as possible then. Have a great one. See you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.